Good evening, everyone. So let's start by recapping where we left off last time. I got a little feedback to summarize and the concepts and to go a little slower. So I'm going to try to do that. So we started off with, we went through the Alter Rebbe. We saw the Alter Rebbe lays out that mitzvah namuvcher to make Kiddush as early as possible. And however, the Alter Rebbe brings this minhag not to make Kiddush between 6 and 7 hours after Chatzos. We went through the Rebbe's letters, which we'll come back to in more detail later on. Then we had the Gemara in Shabbos that when a person comes home from shul, the two malachim accompany him, the good malach and the bad malach. And if he's ready, if they find a set table and with candle, the good malach benches him, and the bad malach answers amen, and vice versa. If they're not ready. So and then we saw Abu Dirham brings this down, and Abu Dirham is the first one to connect it specifically to the planets, the malach of Mars versus the malach of Tzedek, which is the good malach, and he brings it down from Maram Rottenberg. Then we went through we introduced the Gemara. First, we had the Gemara about Zugi, that there's Kpeda not to avoid pairs and even numbers, and we had the Gemara about bloodletting, where Shmuel says that we should not let blood on certain days, and on days when we have Mars in even hours. And Rashi explains the whole system of the astrology as we set up the chart over here. We have the list. I hope this chart helps everyone understand. I know the Gemara and the Rashi can be confusing, but we have here the whole. I think the chart is pretty self-explanatory. Let me share the chart as we're talking about it. So we have this chart here, which shows the hours under Mars's dominion, and the hours each planet. We have the before Mars is Jupiter, Tzedek. So we see the first hour of Shabbos, Friday night, is under Mars. So then we also had a little digression with the Rambam Shitta, but that's not going to be an egg going forward, so we don't have to go over it. But that was just an interesting side point that the Rambam learns this Gemara completely differently. However, we see everyone else, starting from Rabbeinu Hananel, whose Tater is all Divrei Kabbalah from the Geinim through Rashi, and all the other Rishonim learned that Zavi means even numbers, and that's what we're worried about, Mars being on the even numbers. And based on that, we then went through. That's what we got to the heart of the matter that concerns us here, is how do we count these hours? So the first question is, are we counting Shais Manias or Shais Shabbos? So just to recap, there are two ways to count hours. You can count hours of 60 minutes, where the 24-hour period is broken up into 24 parts, 12 hours a day, 12 hours a night. That's called Shais Shabbos. That's the hours we are all familiar with on the clock. Or you can count Shais Manias, which is you just take the time between sunrise and sunset, you divide that in 12, and those are your hours. Some people asked me, how is it that we're talking about Shais Shabbos when in Halacha and in Gemara Halacha, it's always Shais Manias? But that's actually a misnomer. But we're so used to that since that's become accepted. But there's actually a very big machlokes about how we count all times in Halacha, whether it's Shais Manias or Shais Shabbos. The first one, as far as I'm aware, who mentions Shais Manias is Rav Mechia Nasi with this Sefer Eber. He explains the two different kinds of hours and the two different ways of counting them, whether from the beginning of the night, the beginning of the day, or from midnight or midday. So, and the Rambam is the one who really brought Shoismanius into halacha under the influence of the Rambam. In his Parashat Mishnayos already on brachas, he discusses it that the hours, right, in the first Mishnah in brachas, maybe it's like Shema, that to when are you able to say Kriya Shema during the day? So the halacha is up to 3 hours, and the Rambam right there says that it doesn't mean 3 regular hours; it means 3 shoizvanias, which means basically a quarter of the way into the day, a quarter of the time between sunrise and sunset. But many Rishonim disagree with the Rambam. Famously, the Tumas Hadeshin disagrees and holds that it's 3 fixed hours. Many Achreinim paskin like the Tumas Hadeshin, and in fact, and they actually make a strong argument that the whole reason that we say that the Zman Kriya Shema ends 3 hours into the day is because that's when princes wake up. But presumably princes don't get up a different time every day, right? They presumably have their time that they get up every day. So it makes sense that would be a fixed time. According to many of the Rishonim and Achreinim, who pass in this way, Zman Kriya Shema is 3 hours before, meaning is 3 hours into the day, which is 3 hours before Chatzos. And that's if you count from, there's actually 2 different ways to count, even if you use Shoyz Shabbos, which goes back to the question we had too. Even if we assume that the hours of the Mazalas are Shoyz Shabbos, not Shoyz Manias, the question then becomes, how do you count the Shoyz Shabbos? Which we still haven't gotten into detail, but there are different ways to count. We'll see whether you count from the night, from the day, or from Chatzos. And you have the same question in the hours of Halacha. There's actually the Kamar Nechsidim, Ma'aseh B'Peil, they actually hold that all the Zmanim are based on the regular clock. So Zman Kriya Shema is 9 o'clock, Zman Tefillah is 10 o'clock, Zman Bir Chametz, all these things, they follow the clock. So then the question becomes, do you follow Chatzos Amiti, Chatzos Amtzai, that we'll get to. But the point is that it's not a given by any stretch that Halacha and Gemara is referring to Shoyz Zmanius. And generally the assumption is, whether it depends what we're talking about, but generally whenever we're talking about astronomical things, the assumption is that it refers to Shoyz Shabbos. Although we saw that there are those who apply Shoyz Zmanius in that context too. We saw the Tosfos in Eruvin, who assumes that Shoyz Zmanius, and then he says, well, what if you say it is Shoyz Shabbos? Then he asks questions on that. But because then we're gonna have, it's gonna, if you say it's Shoyz Shabbos, so then sometimes something that's supposed to be during the day will end up by night, or vice versa. And that's where we ended with Rabbi Yaakov Emden's answer to that either it's talking about at the equator, or the alternative is that we just count day and night as 2 halves of the 24-hour period, which we'll see is one way of counting night and day, which also in Halacha we'll see in other places. But besides for night and day, which is following the sun, when it's literally when the sun rises and when the sun sets, there's also night and day of the clock, which also has a significance. And for Mazalas, we're going to consider 6 hours on either side of noon as day and 6 hours either side of midnight as night. That was Rabbi Yaakov Emden's answer, and that seems to be the accepted approach to Mazalas. Although as we go through the sources, we'll see.
Noon.
Hold on, let me just finish the sentence, please. As we go through the sources, we'll see that that's some sources do assume that it's Shoyz Zmanius, but the general consensus will be that it's Shoyz Shabbos. So now we're going to go through the sources as we apply it to this minhag. Yes, David?
You said 6 hours after noon. Noon being 12 o'clock, or noon being halfway between sunrise and sunset?
So that we will address.
Okay.
So now we're going to get to the earliest sources of this particular minhag of not making Kiddush between 6 and 7. We already saw Abu Draham earlier, who ties the whole thing with the 2 malachim, to the 2 angels, to the 2 planets that rule at this time. And he brings it from the Maram Rothenberg, and then we'll see it's quoted, it's cited to the Maru, we'll see soon, cites it to the Rekeach, who's a generation before the Maram Rothenberg. So it seems that the custom arose among Chassidei Ashkenaz around the time of the Baalei Tosfos, but we'll see how this. So let's start. We're going to go a little bit out of order. We're going to start with the Tikkunei Shabbos because that's the most influential source. That's the source that's usually cited to as where it became a minhag Kabbalah. Tikkunei Shabbos is from one of the students of the Arizal. It's attributed to the Arizal. It's not from Reb Chaim Vital, but it's generally considered to be the teachings of the Arizal. So let's learn the Tikkunei Shabbos inside. Ba'achar Tefillah, we're on page 23, whoever's following the source book. After the davening, they shouldn't be held up long at shul. They should because it's a mitzvah to try to hurry up and sanctify the day. Whoever is rushes about it is praiseworthy. The secret is explained below. Because we want to make Kiddush before it comes into the dominion of the Samach Mem and the planet of Mars, which is at the beginning of Shabbos night, as is known. The Takev be Kansamu Besam, and as soon as they enter, as people enter their homes, Yebru Keneged Ashulchan She'arichu Umeneira She'edliku Ukveit Shabbos Malkasa. They should say, standing at the table that they set and the lamp that they lit, the candles that they lit, in honor of Shabbos the Queen. This praiseworthy tefillah that's mentioned below, the kavana with intention of the liba, I'm going to go a little fast and just translate the parts that are relevant to our purposes. As we said from the Gemara. So the two malachim are that accompany the person. One is Tzadkiel, which is the malach related to Tzedek, the planet of Jupiter, and one is the Samach Mem, which is related to Mars.
What's the tefillah? Is he talking about Shalom Aleichem? What's the tefillah?
If you let me finish.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you. Tzadkiel, Mishamash B'Sha'achenu Shalav Shabbos, and the good malach of Tzadkiel, Jupiter, its dominion is the last hour of Erev Shabbos. Umamshalte al Kechav Tzedek, and its dominion is on the planet of Jupiter, V'Samach Mem B'Tchilas Leil Shabbos. Umamshalte al Kechav Maidim. Tzadkiel Atev, Tzadkiel is the good angel. V'Samach Mem Hu Hara. If these two malachim find a table, the bed, which is the divan they sat on, and the candle set properly, so the malach of Tzadkiel is crowned with the Shechina, which is called Tzedek. Bayit, Ushem God of Atzum, She'ela Ekia. So it gets into the whole Kabbalistic things of that Shemen and Atbash comes to a shame of Beis Yotes, which is the Gemati of the Shem Ekia, and it comes through the 21. It comes through the 21 psukim that are mentioned in the two kapitulach that we say Mizbashil Yom HaShabbos and Hashem Malach that we said in Kabbalah Shabbos. I say to this and the Sederis comes from the Shem Ekia to the twice Ekia comes in these two kapitulach comes to the head of the Malach of Tzadkiel, and he blesses the person. And at that point, the bad Malach becomes an advocate. He becomes a good Malach. Because that is the truth. Because on Shabbos, all the dinim go away. And the real intention of his coming is to the contrary, not to be a bad angel, a prosecuting angel, but rather to bless you. So this is the relevant portion of the Tikkunei Shabbos, and this is the starting point for this entire discussion. So what we have from the Tikkunei Shabbos is that we have the two malachim who accompany us back from Shul, which represent the 2 hours on either side of the start of Shabbos. the last hour of Friday and the first hour of Shabbos. And in order that it should be under the dominion of the better malach, so we have to hurry up and make Kiddush before it comes into the dominion of the bad malach, which is at the beginning of the night. So just to point out that there's nothing here about waiting. The whole point is to make Kiddush before entering the dominion of Mars and of the bad malach. It's also interesting if you just read this with Pashtus, it would seem that it's talking about Shaizmanius, because he's saying to hurry up before it becomes the time for the bad malach, which is the first hour of Shabbos. So he's saying to make Kiddush before that, which again, it seems like he's talking about the hours of the actual start of Shabbos at first. At least that's the Pashtus, how one would read this. But we'll see how this develops as it goes through the Pesachim. So the next source we have is the Maharsha on Tainus. I'm sorry, David, you want to ask something? Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you. You said when we stand next to the candles and we say a tefillah.
That's irrelevant. So let's go to the Maharsha.
No, hold on. I'm going to ask another irrelevant question quickly. Since considering the Kabbalistic and historical sources for this minhag, how come it's fallen away from everybody else besides from Chabad?
That's not true at all. Firstly,
I've never heard of it.
Pretty much all Chassidim observe this minhag. Some Sfardim, people who are careful about Kabbalistic minhagim.
I never heard of that.
Pretty widespread minhag.
Very interesting. I didn't know that. Thank
I've
you.
heard a story from my mentor, Rabbi Feldman, who told me about a Hasidic Rebbe who got up to make a Kiddush. He raised his hand with a cup, but before he started Kiddush, the clock on the wall chimed 6 o'clock. And he stood up like that, holding the Kiddush in his cup, raised above the table for an hour, singing a nigun, but he did not start.
That's absolutely fantastic.
The next hour.
He's saying a niggin because he can't put down the cup. That's fantastic. That's a great story. Thanks, Pat.
Thank you for sharing.
That's a great story.
So now we go to the Maharsha. So the Maharsha is interesting. The Maharsha is talking about a rather cryptic Gemara in Tainus that the Gemara says Shemesh b'Shabbos tzedakah v'aniyim. So what does it mean, Shemesh b'Shabbos tzedakah? What's the Gemara talking about? So the Maharsha explains Pirish Rashi Irish Shmei Shemesh Shabbos ad Kal Moshe. The Eid Yishleimar the Mashmei the Eiri b'Shabbos.
Move the cursor as you read.
Mehai Lishna the Shemesh tzedakah who muvur mahalach sheba mazol sidnu shatzam chankal. That's the whole cheshbon of the hours of the planets, as we explained last time. Nimtza comes out Shabbos b'tchilas halayla at the beginning of the night of Shabbos. Maschil maidim. It starts with the mazel of Mars. B'tchilas hayom maschil Shabsai, and at the beginning of the day it starts with the mazel of Shabsai, which is also considered a bad mazel. Beis mazalos evu maidim b'Shabsai meirim al hara. K'mfurish mefanin u'perek mishech kechav tzedek shu meir al atev k'dis hasham shu mishamash eis hashash kedem leil Shabbos kedem mazel maidim. And the planet Tzedek, Jupiter, which symbolizes good, which is the hour before the Shabbos night, the last hour of Friday. And it's also the second hour of the day of Shabbos after Shabsai. Because of this, Hashem commanded us to accept Shabbos an extra hour before the night, which starts with the Mars. Because before it starts night, it's still under the dominion of Tzedek. But B'yom Shabbos, so too is interesting. He extends the minhag also to Shabbos day. It doesn't say in the morning. one should wait an hour into the day before he starts his Shabbos Aveda, as it's actually Shulchan Aruch has brought down that you should sleep a little later in Shabbos than you do during the week. So you should wait till the second hour, when is again the mazel of tzedek, which is the good mazel. Because the sun is still shining Friday evening before Shkia, when it's the mazel tzedek, and so too after Netzachama, the second hour of the day of is mazel tzedek on Shabbos day. So when the sun is already shining, that's why it says shemesh staka, that the shemesh comes in mazel tzedek. The sun goes with mazel tzedek. B'seif erev Shabbos, b'tchila Shabbos kedemaidim. V'gamu mazel tzedek b'tchila sichasa b'yem Shabbos achar Shabsai. V'hainu v'zorcho cham yirei shmi b'kabal Shabbos b'em b'yem u'b'em b'laylo sh'ti hashemesh mazel tzedek marpe b'chnafel. So that's why we accept Shabbos early, and we also start the Aveda of Shabbos day, whatever it means starting the Aveda. It doesn't really specify what you're doing, but basically we start Shabbos day, we start both Shabbos night and Shabbos day in the time of the Mazel of Tzedek, and that's when the sun is shining. So that's why the Gemara says from the pasuk that Shemesh b'Shabbos staka, that the sun shines in the time of tzedek, which is a healing time and a good mazel. So from here we see that firstly, the whole idea seems to be to dafka make Kiddush. I mean, he doesn't talk specifically about Kiddush, he talks about Kabbalah Shabbos. But the idea is specifically to do it under tzedek, not just to avoid maidim, but also to specifically tap into the good energies of the mazel tzedek, of the malach that's mamuna on the good mazel. The second thing we see here is, again, the Maharsha seems to be assuming that it's Shoizmanius. Here it's even clearer than the Kunei Shabbos. Kunei Shabbos is just, at first glance, we can really interpret it the other way. But here the Maharsha is quite clear that we're talking about the hour before sunset, and again in the morning, the hour right after sunrise. So it's interesting. Maharsha seems to be going with Shoizmanius, but we'll see how that develops as the sources move along. Next source we're going to look at is the Karban Shabbos. It's a rather obscure sefer from Rabbi Salomon of Shlomo Mekubrid, written in the late 17th century. However, the ideas from here became very popular because it was excerpted or plagiarized, whatever you want to call it, in the very famous sefer called Chendas Yamin, which is a notorious sefer. It became a very popular popularizer of Kabbalah. It brings down a lot of Kabbalistic customs. However, it also has a lot of things from Sabbatean roots, quotes Nas and Amaza. So it's a very controversial sefer. Some say that the author himself was Nasan or one of his disciples. Some say that the printer who printed it put in the Sabbatean things. But anyway, the point is that he takes a lot from the sefer called Karban Shabbos, and this is one of the pieces that he takes from there, which then became very popular because the sefer Chendas Yamin was very widely, it was printed many times, it was widely distributed, and it's quoted quite a bit. So we're not going to read the whole thing, it's quite long, but basically the gist of it is that he quotes the Maharsha, and he explains, he goes with the same mahalach as the Maharsha generally, but puts it into Kabbalistic terms. He explains the pasuk, emes meretz titzmach, tzedek l'shamayim nishkaf, gam Hashem yitnatei b'atzeinu titei nibua, and so he applies that to the same way that emes from that the truth will sprout from the earth, and tzedek, which is, like we said, the mazel of Jupiter, mishamayim nishkaf, justice will be seen from the heavens. And also Hashem will give the good, and our land will give its bounty. So he quotes the Maharsha we just were in a minute ago. He goes through the whole thing of the mazalis, how the two mazalis of Maidim and Chapsai are a bad mazalis, and Therefore, we should add from Tchela Kiddush, we should take in Shabbos an hour earlier, at the end of the hour of Erev Shabbos, which is still the good Mazel of Tzedek, in order to start the Kiddush of Shabbos with the Mazel of Tzedek. So to Shabbos morning, we should start our Shabbos day in the second hour, not in the first hour when it's the Mazel of Shabbos, but in the second hour when it's once again the Mazel of Tzedek. So he's quoting the Maharsha, and he goes through. I think that's enough for our purposes. So the point is that from here, the Chamnas Yom, the Karban Shabbos, which is then quoted by the Chamnas Yom and quoted by many others from the Chamnas Yom, seems to be like the Maharsha before him, emphasizing the point that we want to make Kiddush under the Mazel of Tzedek. So what if somebody is missed the Mazel of Tzedek? Doesn't say that you have to wait for the next Mazel. It doesn't seem to even make sense, right? Because the whole thing was that we have the two angels coming, and if you're ready and everything is set, then you come home from shul, you immediately make Kiddush, they give a bracha. And if not, Chas v'shalom, the opposite. So what if somebody already missed the Mazel of Tzedek, so you should wait another hour and be even more late, right? So it would seem from the Maharsha and the Karban Shabbos that the whole point is only to make Kiddush before the seventh hour, not to wait after the seventh hour. So let's move on to the next source. It's quite long here, so I don't want to go through the whole thing. But then we come to the Sefer of Rizil HaMalach, which is a bit dense, gets into the Kabbalah of the specific Malachim. I actually included it just for if anyone's curious, wants to delve into that, but I got the specific requests to teach this piece, so let's at least learn a little bit of it. Rizil HaMalach was a sefer. It's based on secrets that were revealed by the Malach Rizil to Adam Rishon. It's mentioned already in the Zohar Kaddish. It's mentioned in the writings of the Gaonim. It's a very early. We have very early references to it. But the actual sefer that we have today, the consensus is that it was authored by Eliezer Megermaisa, who's known, or he's also known as Eliezer. He was the Baal HaRekeach. That's his most famous work, and he was from the city of Worms, which sometimes is called Germaisa. Vermaisa, it's used interchangeably. He lived, as we see, in the late 12th and early 13th century, and it seems that he was the author of the Sefer, though Rabbi Yaakov Emden argued that it was Rav Abulafia, who was a generation later, but the consensus today is that this was authored by the Rekeach. And we'll see later the Maharil actually cites the Rekeach as the first source of this minhag. So, move your
cursor, move the cursor.
Poetic introduction to the seven planets, and so he's going to say which angel is appointed to which planet. So Michael al Shabsai Mimuna, so Michael is rules over Shabsai. Barchiel al Tzedek Mimuna, that's the angel of blessing, is on Jupiter. Gabriel al Maida Mimuna, so Gabriel is the angel of ministering over Mars. And Rafal al Chama Mimuna, we know that the sun is associated with healing. So that's Malach Rafal. Chasdio al Nega Mimuna, Tzadkiel al Keicha Mimuna. Anoel al Levana Mimuna. So those are the angels that are appointed to each of the seven planets. Although we'll see, he then later mentions other planets, and here in the margins, it brings down that from Chaim Vital. He gives other names for the seven angels related to the seven planets, which actually Rizil HaMalach also mentions further on. So we have on, you can see on the bottom, it lists all the names. So for Mars is the Samach Mem.
The minhag is not to pronounce the names of Malachim, those which are not used for names of people, like Michael or Gabriel, are the names we do not pronounce.
Thank you. So we have so we have the Samach Mem is on Mars, and Rafa'el is, it goes through all the names. It's not really relevant. The point is that, again, we have the good angels that are on Tzedek, specifically on Jupiter, and the Samach Mem is on Mars, as well as he has a different malach that's on Shab side, which is again from the negative side. Although we said before in the above in the Zil malach that the Gabriel is appointed over Mars, so there seems to be some contradiction, but we'll see later. He actually addresses he lists both. So Shab side Karva Yavish, it's cold and dry, like ice and frozen. Tzedek Cham Belach, Jupiter is warm and moist. Memesach Benini, Maidim Cham Yavish, Kaesh, Mars is hot and dry like fire. Cham Akuesh, Nega Karvachem, Kechav Karvacham Yavish Vach Ma'at, Vavana Memusach Bekarvachem. So he addresses the nature of each of the planets. We can skip over the next part. It's not really so relevant. Then he says which planet is has dominion over which things. So Shab Sevimuna, Rebach, Alanius. It's on profit and poorness. So it has many negative attributes. It has on wounds and illnesses and injuries and the opposite of life. Tzedek, which is the good planet, is Mamuna V'Chaim, on life, V'Shol and peace, V'Teva and good, V'Simcha and joy, V'Esher riches, V'Kavod, glory, and V'Agdula and greatness, V'Malchus and on kingship. Maidim, again, which is Mars, which is the bad side, is Mamuna V'Adam, on blood, V'Acherev, on the sword, V'Aresha, on the wickedness, V'Asatan, V'Muhammad on war, V'Nakaman on vengeance, V'Akina on jealousy, V'Rivis on people who are Machlekes, V'Amakis on blows, V'Hapsoim and on wounds, V'Barzel on metal, V'Eish and on fire, V'Amayim and on water, V'Amapelis and on avalanches. Basically on everything that's terrible. Then he goes through the other angels. Let's just skip over to that's basically what's relevant to us. Let's skip to the next paragraph. Even though they are appointed to these dominions, they don't have permission to bestow good or to do harm. Everything is only by the command of their creator, and everything is at his will. Because, like as he says, that they don't do evil and they also don't do good. They only do what Hashem says them to do. And even Yidden wouldn't need the light of the sun by day and the light of the moon by night. Hashem goes before them by day. The pillar of the cloud won't move away during the day. And also in the world to come, the Yidden will not need the light of the sun nor the light of the moon, not by day and not by night. As it says, so this is what now he's going to recite the names of the malachim, and here we have the malachim the way we had not the way he said it before, but rather the way Reb Chaim Vital says it. So apparently there's the malachim that are in charge of the dominion of the planets, and which we started with, which is the Malachi Ashares, and then you have the actual Malachim that dominate during those hours. We're not going to get into the whole how we reconcile it. Where were we? So just I want to point out, he goes through the cycles of the different planets. So Zion Malachim was Zion choice. There's 7 Malachim to 7 hours. Shabsai Mishamashim Kol Mazel Shtei Shanu Umechza. In each Mazel, Shabsai completes a revolution in 2.5 years, a cycle. Nimtzu Gema Mishamashim Kol Mazel is cool and Blamachana, and over a 30-year cycle, it's Mishamash with all the other Mazalis. Tzedek Mishamashim Kol Mazel Yid Beis Chedesh. Nimtzu Gema Kol Yid Beis Shanim. Tzedek Jupiter stays a year with each mazel. A month. So its entire cycle is 12 months. We'll see some other places it says that Maidim cycle is 24 months. So he goes through each of the planets. It's not so relevant to us. Here he goes through the cycles. We saw that already in the Rambam. The cycles, the spheres. Which is above which. So I think we'll move on. Not to spend too much time on this. And then we have here from the Shut Mario Yuda Yaila, where he points out the difference in the Malachim, but he brings down this minhag about making Kiddush before. He brings it from the Magen Avraham, which we'll see in a minute. And he says, over the 24 hours, there's 4 hours. Over 24 hours of Shabbos is the 4 hours, which is of the bad mazalis, and through Hashem gave it to us the Shabbos to turn that over into happiness and good to the good and to the joyful side. So again, the point is to avoid the bad mazalis and to try to be mechaben to the good mazalis. So now we're going to get to the next subject, is how we count the hours. So we know, we already said that it has to be even hours. It cannot be shaizmanias. As Taisvis's questions, if it was shaizmanias, it wouldn't add up. The kufis, the seasons, they wouldn't be fixed. And it just, the whole thing wouldn't add up. So the question now becomes, how do you count shais? So we're saying shais Shav is fixed hours, but where do you start to count from? There's different ways to start to count. So here we get back to, again, the first source of this whole subject, the Sefer Eber, and he explains that there are different ways to count the day. First of all, the word yom can have different meanings. Yom can mean a 24-hour period. In English as well, we could say, Monday, Tuesday, once a day I do this. That doesn't necessarily mean by day. It means once in a 24-hour period. And then yom can also mean daytime, when the sun is shining, or the hours of the day. So there are 4 ways to count. You can start from the beginning of the night. You can start from the beginning of the day. You can start from midday. You can start from midnight. And those are 4 ways of counting hours and days. So he goes through the whole different ways of counting, and I don't think there's any reason to read this inside. Whoever wants to can read it on their own. But generally, the point is that he says that the Nakuda I want to bring, let's read inside just the main Nakuda. So he says that there'll always be 12 hours of day and night, even where sometimes you have days that are shorter, days that are longer in terms of sunlight. But this is where he introduces this concept that one way of counting day is that there's always 12 hours a day and 12 hours a night, no matter when it gets light, when it gets dark. We don't care about that. So daytime is always 6 hours on either side of noon, and nighttime is 6 hours on either side of Chatzei Salayla, of midnight. So that basically answers the question that Taisvis asked, right? That's what Rabbi Yaakov Emden was saying. And here we have a much earlier source, long before even Taisvis, that says this, that this is how you're supposed to count these hours. The Matzlach that always brings us to the same time. That way we can have the same time. In this way, every day will have an equal number of hours. You're not going to have some days longer, some shorter. Because in some days where half the day, the 6 hours after midday, are longer, there's more daytime hours than nighttime hours. But then you also have the opposite season where you can have more nighttime hours than daytime hours, and over the year it evens out. And you're always going to have 12 complete days between day and night. Here he explains it in terms of the astronomy. So just to preface, the Sefer Ibra is based on, there are two general approaches to astronomy in Chazal. We're not going to get too into it because it gets very dense very quickly. But there is the Shitta that the Earth is sort of, it could be either flat or round, doesn't really matter. But the point is that the Rakia, the heavens are sort of this dome on top of Earth, and the sun goes over the Earth and then sort of dips under the Earth, which is to go back to where it rises. That's Zman Rabbeinu Tam is based on that approach to astronomy. But of course, there's the other approach where, which we already saw on the Rambam, where everything is spheres and everything is just revolving. There's no up and down. That's also one of the roots of the machlokes in Zmanim between the Geonim and Rabbeinu Tam. So the Sefer Ibr seems to be going with the same approach as Rabbeinu Tam, where the sun's going under the earth. So he's saying, so the journey of the sun from the midpoint of the heavens above the earth at noon of day is 12 hours to its midpoint under the earth. So that's I think that's enough from here. You can whoever wants can read to the end. He goes through why I didn't actually copy all, but he goes through at length after the piece that I copied here. Explains why he says actually it's easier to keep time from day and night. That's why, because Chatzos is not something that everyone necessarily can see. So that's why days have to start either by Shkia or by nights, either sunrise or sunset. That's something that everyone sees right away. And so the Goyim start with the daytime, and Taka would make sense to start with the daytime, but the Torah says by Yerev Vayiveker, he goes into Arichas why we start by night, but that's not really relevant to us. But the point is, we see here that there's this idea of day always being a fixed 12-hour day. Now we're going to get to Shut Ma'ariel, which is the earliest halachic source that discusses this directly, the way we cheshbon out the hours. The Ma'ariel is a very influential Rishon. He's the source of minhag Ashkenaz generally goes back to the Ma'ariel. So the Ma'ariel is addressing the question of how to count the Kufa. We saw earlier in the Gemara that the Cheshbon Shmuel says to the time of the Kufa. The Kufa is the change in the seasons. Now, the Gemara says that at the time of the Kufa, you can't drink water at that time, and there's have to be careful. It's some explain it because it's a change in the guard of the malachim, so to speak, that there are malachim that are in charge of each season, and when they change the guard, it's a time of danger. There are other explanations, but and we follow the Kufa Shmuel as we explained last time very briefly. There are two ways of counting setting the calendar that are brought down in the Gemara, two primary approaches. The Kufa Shmuel, where it's the solar year is 365 and a quarter days, and the Kufa Ravada, where the solar year is where you add up 19 lunar years with the Iber and everything, and you divide that by 19, and that's about 4 minutes shorter than the Kufa of Shmuel in each solar year. So our calendar is actually based on the Kufa of Ada. Although even already the Rama points out that the Kufa of Ada isn't exact either. We'll see later that the Rama, in the time of the Rama already, they knew that the solar year is actually 7 minutes approximately less than the Kufa of Ada. But our calendar is based on the Kufa of Ada. However, with the Cheshbon of the Tkufis, it's much easier to use the Kufa Shmuel because it's just very simple. It's always going to be 365 and a quarter days. So you divide that by into 4, and the length of each Kufa is a quarter of that. So now the question is, how do we Cheshbon out so we know what day is the Kufa? Now, how do we know what hour? So I mean, we know what day and what hour, but how do we count those hours? So that's the question that the Maril is posed. So the question is, what may name it? Shashi perakets on Ma'abrin. Gabi Sev Baruch Shmismait Hayom Chetzi Bezrichas Bezachas Chetzi B'Shkil Ma'Robes. We mashal Noisim Shebetkovas Teres Bezayin Umechzet Tishay Betes. So Chovin Mashal Niskatzer Hayom Niskatzer Kuli B'Sefer. Ufichach Berish Hagmar Sham. So he goes through the whole thing basically about that by Shoy's Manius, we have some days are long, some days are short, and the Kufa of Tevis, which comes out of winter, is going to be very short hours, whereas the Kufa Tishrei and Nisan, which are Yom Mashavim, the days that are equal with the nights, it'll be approximately 12 hours, and the Kufa Tammuz is going to be very long hours if it's during the day. The Kufa, if it's during the night, it's going to be the other way around. Obviously, that Tammuz you're going to have very short hours, and Tevis you're going to have very long hours by night, and he cites the Teis Shans, which is another source, early source for Shoy's Manius. Teis Shans in the beginning of Brachas. We don't actually have Teis Shans. Teis Shans from Shimon Mishans was one of the great Bali Teisvis. However, we don't, not all the Masechta survive in his draft of the Teisvis, so we don't have that, but it's quoted extensively in the Rishonim, this on the beginning of Brachas, where he explains that if we say that, so that's not the way. We don't count the hours of the Zmanim of davening the same way as we count the hours of the Mazalas, but rather by portions of the day. Shoyzmanis. So the question is, how do we count the Cheshbon of the Kufa? So the Mario answers. He brings a raya from the Gemara that when it talks about Avodah Zarah, when the Gemara talks about how Yeshua stopped the sun, it counts the day as 12 hours, even though he stopped the sun. There's a machlokes there was for 12 hours, he stopped it for 24 hours. There are different opinions how long he stopped it, 6 hours. But anyway, the Gemara counts the 12 hours of the day. So you see that the 12 hours of the day are not dependent on the sun. There's a fixed 12 hours that are called day. This is Medish Es Hayem Kufa Tammuz was in the Kufa Tammuz. So even though then it's the Kufa of Tammuz, so it should have been more than 12 hours a day, right? The Gemara talks about how he stopped it for X number of hours, but in addition to the 12 hours of the day at that time. But if we're talking about fixed hours, which it has to be when we're talking about day and night, right? If we're talking about Shavuos Manius, it wouldn't make sense, because if he says that the sun was stopped for 24 hours, how's that Shavuos Manius? I mean, Shavuos Manius would always be 12 hours, no matter how long he stopped the sun, right? So it has to be talking about Shavuos HaShavuos. And even though it was Kufas Tammuz, it was in the summer, nevertheless, the Gemara refers to the daytime as 12 hours long. So you see that even in Kufa Tammuz, the day still has 12 hours. So he goes through all arichas there, how you can see that based on the astronomy. So, but he says from the karach of the sfeik, since there's a suffix, I'm careful in the Kufa, Tevis, and Tammuz. Because there are two sfeikas, which we'll specify as we get later in the tshuva. But however, when it comes to the times of tefillas of mincha and shachas, the zmanim of davening, etc., and when we accept Shabbos, it's obvious that we go according to the hours of the day, meaning shoyzmanias. The Alpina Mechakyo, Shnei Aravim, Mechin Tetzul Erev, and therefore we always count 6 hours from Chatzos until the night. So we have 2 out of them basically. There's 2 ways of counting daytime. We have the Shoyz Manias, which is from sunrise to sunset, and we have Shoyz Shabbos that are always 12 hours on either side of Chatzos. That's how I explained it to several people who wondered what we saw that. So, and this that you write from Tesis Shans at the beginning of Brachas, we can answer that from this that there are 2 malachim that accompany the person on the night of Shabbos. One is good and one is bad. And I heard Mipi Meiri, Rabbi Gershon. I heard the explanation from my teacher, Rabbi Gershon, who's a completely unknown Rishon, but he was one of the Rabbeim of the Maharil. In addition to his famous Rabbeim, the Maharil actually studied under quite a few of the Rishonim of his time, most famously the Maharash, Shmuel Neustadt, and Shlomo of Neustadt, and several others. But one of the contemporaries who was less famous, and today we've forgotten, is Rabbi Gershon. He's mentioned in several other Svarim. He's mentioned by the Marivau, I believe, and several other Rishonim. So the Maharil says that he heard from Rabbi Gershon, and here he says he thinks that it also says that in the Rekeach. Even though in our Sefer Rekeach we can't find it, but he's attributing this minhag to the Rekeach, which is Rabbi Elazar of Germaizel, we saw, the author of Sefer Rizio Amalach. The Hainu, if we say that Katznash Chalam, according to the order of Katznash Chalam that we saw in the order of the planets and their rule over the hours, Tzedek Yetza Umaydim Nichnas. So Tzedek, when Shabbos starts, Tzedek goes out and Mars comes in. The and that is that one is good and one is the opposite of good. So according to what I just explained before, he's saying that there's always that the time of the mazalis is fixed, does not depend on when sunrise is. So then this whole thing of the 2 malachim that are on either side of Shabbos starting, it only applies in the days of Nisan and Tishrei, where Shkia is actually 6 hours after Chatzos. So the Maharil is assuming that this whole Kapeda only applies when the 2 angels the 2 malachim that accompany us from Shul are at that time when it's actually in the Shabbos comes in, when Shoyz Manias and Shoyz Shabbos coincide. Similarly, in the Shut Ma'il Chadashis, he says basically the same thing. But he explains more at length how he is careful. He said it before that he's careful on the 2 Sveikis. So basically, we'll see later how the Tzemach Tzedek explains it. The Tzemach Tzedek, not the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek Akadme. But the point is that he was careful to by both cheshbenis of the hours. We'll see it as we go to the Tzemach Tzedek. We also have the minhag Maharil, who's from his student Reb Shner, who recorded all of his practices, all the Maharil's practices, and that's basically the foundation of minhag Ashkenaz. And he says, "Ava Mari Segal, Padis of Gemara, Beperikal Kisvish, Neimach and Baran Berev Shabbos, Beres Mashekskinu, Chet Shabbos, Vachatev, Veidach Hipuche." That we said, he says in the name of his Rebbe, the Maharil, that we said that Erev Shabbos, the 2 malachim come to see what was set up in Kavod Shabbos. Issa B'Medrash, they Bezam Azolis, should say Tzedek Umaydim. It says in the Medrash that we don't know we don't have this Medrash today, but that the 2 mazalis represent, the 2 malachim are connected to the 2 mazalis of Tzedek and Maidim. And they are dominion is on Erev Shabbos around Shkia. One to bench and the other the opposite. If everything's ready as should be, the one that's supposed to the blessing malach gives the bracha and leaves, and his friend, the malach that's not good, has to answer amen. And so too in the reverse. So you see that there was this association with the two malachim, and as he said, it's associated with the planets, which are Shais Shabbos. It's only an issue when they coincide, which is either in Nisan or in Tishrei, where the days are and nights are approximately even. Now we have the Levush, who is going to quote this. So here the Levush is going to start talking about actually the Kufa, how we calculate the Kufa, and what the Marel's Chashas were.
Can we take a break?
We'll take a break after the Tzemach Tzedek. A few more minutes.
Okay.
So the Levush goes through, we'll say it outside. That we say that it says in the calendars, the times of the Mildas and the times of the Tkufa, it's not, it doesn't refer to the times that we count from the beginning of every night, because then we wouldn't know, it goes to the whole Arichas, we don't have to read the whole thing, but basically his point is that since the times, the days are different lengths, and the time from the morning till Chatzais till the night, it changes over the course of the year, so it can't be based on that. So let's skip to the part that's highlighted. So when you say that Kufas Nisan started at the beginning of the night, it must be that it means that it's 6 hours after Chatzai. It's not literally when sunset is, although in Nisan it approximately coincides. But we'll see in the other Kufas it's going to make a big difference. So it's 6 hours after Chatzai of the day before. And that's considered the beginning of the night. So if so, the Kufa Tammuz is going to come out 13 and a half hours after the Chatzais of the day before. It's going to come out 1:30 at night. It's not going to be 7.5 hours in the beginning of the night, because then the night starts much earlier, much later in Tammuz. Sorry, right? It's going to be only a few hours. Let's say if Shkia is at 8:30, so 1:30 is not going to, from 8:30 to 1:30 is only 5 hours. And so too with Kufa Tevis, with Kufa Tishrei, etc. So that he's going back to the same problem that Tevis struggled with, that in order for the Kufas to be even, you have to say that it's referring to day and night as the 6 hours, the 6 hours either side of noon being the day, 6 hours either side of night, of midnight being the night. So even though the Kufa isn't the true Kufa, because we're going back to the Kufa of Shmuel, which is not entirely accurate, as the Gemara already recognizes. Nevertheless, according to what we received about the danger between one Kufa to another, apparently it seems that it was given over to us on the average Kufas, and you have to be makbid on it. Even though the people aren't careful only from the beginning, let's say if they're counting the hours of the Kufa from the beginning of the night, but that's not the correct way of counting. The real akpada should be according to the hours that I wrote, which is where you measure from midday or midnight, not from the beginning of the night. He ends the same way we saw in the Gemara and Shabbos, that since people are doing it with Peil, so Hashem protects the foolish. Now, Tzemach Tzedek is it's called Tzemach Tzedek Akadmin because to differentiate, distinguish him from the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. He's going to explain now what the Levush and Maril were saying. So he actually addresses this head on, this question. How do we count the hours of the Kufa from the beginning of the night? Since we count, right, we count our days start with the night before. So one way, if you say that Kufa is 12 hours into the day, 14 hours a day. So you just count from the beginning of the night and whenever Shkia is and count hours from there. So the dispassionate minig machshav yom v'leilu Shabbos leilu. K'meishen b'nisim v'tishrei. U'maschil machshav hashoyis mitchilas havayla yid b'shoyis havayla yid b'shoyis havayla. So he's saying the minig became, the common minig became that even though everybody knows that we have to do shoyis hashabbos, not shoyis maniyos, that has to be fixed hours the way they are in Nisan and Tishrei, which is the 12 was, which is 60-minute hours. But the minig, the common minig is to count these hours from the beginning of the night, from Shkia. And they count 12 hours of night from Shkia, and then the next 12 hours is day. And that's how they count the time of the Kufa. And they don't differentiate between long days and long nights. So they are counting, like we said, fixed days and nights of 12 hours each, but they're starting to count from the beginning of the night. And some want to count day and night according to the path of the sun every single day. That the sun will always be above your head exactly at half day, at noon. Whether during the winter, during the summer, during the winter, and night always starts exactly 6 hours after chatzos of the day, after midday. Comes out that in Tammuz, when the day is very long, so if the Kufa comes out 7.5 hours into the night, you don't count the hour 7.5 from the beginning of the night, which is long after 6 hours after chatzos. You start 3 hours earlier. Let's say if Shkia was 9 o'clock, you're going to start at 6 o'clock. Because at that time where the Tzemach Tzedek lived, it was 9 hours from, in the long days, Shkia was only 9 o'clock. But in truth, at 6 o'clock, it's already considered night for these purposes. For davening, obviously, it's not. Certain things where it depends on day and night as actual day and night. For example, when we start Shabbos, when we have this amount of davening, that actually depends on day and night. However, here, where we're talking about the hours of day and night, 6 o'clock always starts night, even though the sun did not set. So too in Tevis, in the winter, when the day is short, and the sun sets at 3 o'clock. Nevertheless, it's still considered day and it's not considered night until 6 o'clock. Even though it comes out 3 hours after Shkia. They don't know the Vushim already discussed it in the end of Hilchos Chedesh, and explained it that way. The Ramaz so it comes out that he wrote explicitly, even though it would be correct not to count the hours from the beginning of the night the way the masses do, as is common practice. Nevertheless, he didn't want to nullify the minhag of Yidden, and he found something to rely on in this rule that Hashem protects the foolish. So again, he's quoting the Levush that really we should count from chatzos the hours, and if we say the Kufa is 7 hours into the night, it means it's 7 hours after 6 o'clock. So it's 1 o'clock with Kufa. But nevertheless, since the minhag, the mass custom, the custom practiced by the masses is to count from the beginning of the night, so he didn't want to change the minhag and Shem B'Sayim Hashem. So too I found in the Maril. Here he quotes the Maril, and also in his Tshuva that he's cheshish the 2 sveikis. You see there. So we won't read the whole thing. I'll just say it outside briefly. So he says that he was only machmir for himself. Maril also didn't want to be mevatel the minhag. Nevertheless, for himself, he was machmir before and after the common time, 3 hours. That's a teres fekid that he was machmar, because since he knew that the real time could be 3 hours before or 3 hours after, based on what time, whether it's in the winter or the summer, right? If the night started, they're counting from the beginning of the night. So let's say Shkia is 3 o'clock, like in the winter. So they're going to count. Let's say the Kufa is 8 hours into the night. So the Kufa is going to be 2 in the morning. So they're going to count from 3 o'clock, and they're going to count it at 11 p.m. So the Maril was makbid to count another 3 hours later. And the same thing beforehand, if the Kufa is another way, right? If, in the summer, where the night starts after 6 o'clock, because the night could start at 9 o'clock. But the others, he didn't direct count only from Shkia, because that's the common practice. Whether summer or winter, he counted from the Shkia, from Shkia. And I would say that to explain what he says, that he would count 3 hours before and after. Not that each time he would count 3 hours before and after. Rather, depending on the season, sometimes it would be before, and sometimes he would wait 3 hours after. In other words, for himself, he was chayshish for the true time of the Kufa, when it should be, or actually still not the true time, right? Because we said that the Kufa is an estimated time, but the true cheshbon, when according to the Kufa Shmuel, should come out. But in the summer, he would wait 3 hours later because of the mistaken cheshbon. So he would keep the cheshbon that everybody did, the common practice, but he would also be chayshish for the true real time. So therefore, Tzemach Tzedek concludes, that's why I also directed that we should not change the minhag as was practiced by those before us. So even though really the real way to calculate is by, like we said, that daytime is always 6 hours either side of noon, nighttime 6 hours either side of midnight. Nevertheless, we're for the Indian of Kufa, since it became the common minhag to calculate from the beginning of the night. So we see already that these 3 great authorities that Peskim that did not want to change the common minhag, even though the minhag is based on a mistake. So he goes on at length. Let's skip to the end. He also quotes from the Tesis Yomtiv that says the same thing, that all 3 of them will have an that for them are illuminated the paths of heaven, and they were great experts in the secret of the Ibr. Especially Maril was very well known. He had extensive knowledge of astronomy, and so too the Tesis Yomtiv. Nevertheless, even though they knew the minhag was mistaken, it was difficult for them. They didn't want to change the minhag. And they left the minhag for the minhag Yisrael to count the hours from the beginning of the night. So how can these simple people, he's putting down those that are trying to change the minhag, like who do you think you are that you're going to start changing the minhag after the great Peskin that the Maril, the Ubush, and the Tesis Yomtiv, that they understood the taina that these people are saying that the minhag is wrong, and they still kept the minhag the way it is. So, but that's the minhag specifically about the Kufa, because that was the established minhag. But nevertheless, we see from here that the real way to count Shabbos came in this Matisha. So the way they counted is that it's not like Shois Manis. They're counting 12 fixed hours, but they're starting from Shkia, 12 hours after Shkia's night, even though it could be the night is much more than 12 hours or much less. Doesn't matter. We're counting 12 hours. That's the minute for the Kufa. Even if the sun rose after 6 hours, it's still called night for 12 hours. So what we see from here is 2 things. Firstly, we see that the proper way to count hours when we're talking about mazalis, when we're talking about astronomical and astrological matters, the proper way to count hours is only from chatzes. We count 6 hours before chatzes is the beginning of the day. 6 hours after Chatzos is the beginning of the night. And day and night are always 12 fixed hours. We'll get into it's actually, it could be a minute less, a minute more because Chatzos moves, but we'll get to that later. Right now, we're just going simple that from Chatzos to Chatzos is a 24-hour period. Half that time is day, half that time is night. And nevertheless, the second thing we see from these great Peskim, Rishonim and Achronim, from the Maril to the Levush, Tesus Yomtiv, and Tzemach Tzedek, that they all said that even though the correct cheshbon is from Chatzos, nevertheless, since the common practice is to count from the beginning of the night for the Kufa, they would not change the common practice, even though it was clearly mistaken. So we see how important the common practice is in these matters. But nevertheless, we do see that the Maril for himself was makbid on the time, in addition to the time that the primary Kpeda is the time that everybody's makbid, even though it's wrong. But for himself, he was also makbid on the true time. So we'll see how that's applied to our Indian of Kiddush between 6 and 7. Any questions?
Very good.
Okay, so I guess we'll break for the here. When we come back next week, we're gonna start addressing the actual practical minhag, how the Pesach
Looking forward to that.
bring down the minhag, and the operative question we're gonna start with: what if you missed the time of Tzedek? If it's already, you can't make Kiddush before the 7th hour. Do you have to wait until after the 7th hour, or do you just make Kiddush as early as possible?
Well, the operative question, the main question is, we still haven't come up with a pile, whether we're doing Shas Zamanias or Kvias.
Sure, we did. We did that. We started off with the Rebbe's letters. The Rebbe says clearly that's Shabbos.
Okay.
But we're going to circle back to the Rebbe's letters.
But based on these
We're going to
Rishonim,
understand the Rebbe's letters in light of all these sources. When we're done with all the sources, we're going to circle back.
But based on these sources, so far it's ambiguous. So far we see that they're not defining their terminology. In fact, you said that it's mashma from some of these Rishonim that the Dafka talking about Shas Manias.
Which Rishonim?
You were saying about the Maril, I think it was, who said it was Shas Manias? No? Okay, whatever. I'll talk to you about it later. We don't have to hold everybody else up.
Okay, very well. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you very much, Shirley. Wonderful.
We'll resume next week.
Yasher Koyach. What's the a quick question?